Full Stack Basics presents Master JavaScript. Unlock the power behind the frameworks.
Hey everyone, welcome to truth number 7. Frameworks are temporary. JavaScript is forever. And I'm going to show that to you in this episode. So what I want you to do is to open your code from episode 6 where we built the budget tracker. If you are just joining us, please go ahead and check out episode 6 so that then you can follow along in this episode. In the code we generated for episode 6, for the vanilla JavaScript version of the budget tracker, we are updating the screen and the storage manually. Now, in this episode, we are going to separate the concerns so that our vanilla JavaScript reacts to changes just like React. So the first thing I'm going to do here is that I'm going to rename my app.js. And I'm going to call it app-ep06.js. The reason why we're doing this with the vanilla JavaScript version only is so that you can have the progression of the code, because the code in the React side won't change as much. So go ahead and do this and then create another file called app-ep07.js because we're going to change the entire implementation, but I want you to have both. Once you create this file, then we're going to go to index.html and we're going to point our index.html to EP7. So please pause and make sure that you're here. Perfect. So now let's go ahead and implement the vanilla JavaScript code in a more React-like way. We're going to be separating the concerns. And the first thing we're going to do is that we're going to obviously load the stored data at the start. So please go ahead and implement this variable. Next, we are going to separate the functionality of saving changes, meaning new transactions, to storage. For this, we're going to implement this function, save to storage, and then we're going to set the transactions or the updated transactions list to the local storage. Please pause and implement this function. Now, instead of setting the items in the render function like we did in episode 6, this time around we are going to separate the logic and centralize all updates into one set transactions function. This function will mimic the use effect in React that we learned in the previous episode. Please pause and implement. As you can see, our set transactions take new transactions. So the first thing that we're going to do here is simply load the transactions variable with the new transactions. Then what we're going to do is update the UI with the new transactions. We still have to create this function, yet we're going to call it here. And then the last step is that any new transactions we are going to save to storage. And this is going to mimic how use effect runs in React. Please pause and implement. Now that we have this done, I'm going to just minimize both functions so that we can see clearly, because then we're going to go ahead and actually implement the function to update UI. So please go ahead and create the bare bones function. In this function, when we update the UI, there are two things that we are updating. We are updating the list of transactions, which they reside in the element with the ID of transactions in the index.html. And of course, we want to update the balance. Pause and implement this. The next thing we want to do is that we want to initialize the list's inner HTML to blank and the total to 0. Pause and implement. Once we have that, then we want to take all the transactions and we want to iterate through each of the transactions using the for each that we have used before. Obviously, in the list of transactions, we have individual transactions, which we're going to identify as TX. Then we're going to include the arrow here in between the brackets, and then I'm going to include a set of curly braces and make some room. Once again, we are inside of the update UI function. Pause and implement. Then what do we want to do here? Well, for each transaction, we want to create an LI element. Then we want to, of course, update the LI element text content with the description and the amount. Pause and implement. We're still working inside of the for each loop. So the next thing we want to do is we want to set the conditional class name depending on whether or not it's income or expense, like we did before. Pause and implement. Last thing we're going to do in this for each is first we're going to append each LI containing each transaction to the list, and then of course we're going to update the total, which is the balance. Pause and implement. Now, outside of the for each, which I'm going to minimize, but still inside of the update UI function, we want to update the balance text content with the total or with the updated total. So please pause and implement this. Perfect. So now that we have our update UI, I'm going to minimize this. And then the next thing we want to do is, of course, handle the submission of the form. And for this, of course, we need to get access to the form, to the input fields for description and amount. Please pause and implement. You can see already how the structure of this JavaScript file is fairly different from the one in episode 6. So now that we have access to these elements, of course, we want an event listener that will listen for the submit event, and it takes the event as a parameter. Then we include here the arrow, a set of curly braces, and we close the brackets and make some room so we can include our logic in here. Please pause and implement. The next three things that we want to do inside of the event listener is prevent default, and then get the description value from the field, which we're going to trim, and then we're going to get the value for the amount, which we're going to parse as a float. Pause and implement. Next, we're going to add some conditional logic in which if there's no description or amount when the form is submitted, we simply exit out of the program. Last few things we want to do in the event listener, and I'm just going to scroll up so that you can see clearly, is the following. First, we are going to create a variable called new transactions. This is going to be a list where we have the spread operator over the transaction list, and then of course we have the object containing the description and the amount. This allows us to set the new transactions, which we are going to do by calling the set transactions function that we created. Then we empty out the values in the input fields. Pause and implement, please. With this done, I am simply going to minimize our event listener, because then the last very thing that we want to do here is update the UI by calling the update UI function. Pause and implement. So as you can see here, we are really now doing vanilla JavaScript code looking more like React, because we have a function to save to storage. We have a function to set transactions, and every time there's a new transaction, it is saved and the UI is updated. Exactly how we saw useEffect work in the previous episode when we did it for React. Then we have another separation of concerns, which is this update UI function that updates our UI. I'm going to minimize it again. And then, of course, we have the event listener. So if you notice, we call the update UI twice, whenever we set a new transaction and whenever we open the browser from scratch. So what I'm going to do now is simply open this with Live Server and meet me over at the browser. Over at the browser, because we're storing some things in local storage, you could have the side effect in which you see some of the old transactions. So if you see them, all you need to do for now is go to application here and go to local storage. And if you have any transactions here, all you have to do is delete them, okay? So let's go ahead and test this out by adding your salary. So now you're going to be a vanilla JavaScript evangelist, and I'm going to put you at $2 million a year because you deserve that. And let's say now you're going to take a nice vacation, which is going to cost you around $300,000. Once again, I'm just thinking big here. I'm not sure if that's what it costs, but I'm sure you can get one hell of a vacation for $300,000. And as you can see, everything goes great. We can go to inspect again. We can go to application and you see the transaction stored in local storage. So what have we learned? What we have learned is how things like use effect in React work under the hood, because data loads on startup and every state changes triggers a render and a save, just like use effect. And the cool thing here is that no framework was used. You have made your app a little more intelligent without using frameworks. And the cool thing is that now you know how the frameworks do it. This is the whole point. The more you know how the frameworks work under the hood, the more powerful you get. Now, let's go ahead and do this with React. And this is going to be a breeze. So open up your React version of the budget tracker.
This premium content is brought to you by Full Stack Basics JavaScript Bundle. Create a full stack Kanban board prototype with Vanilla.js and the Gem stack, including registration, login, and drag and drop functionality without libraries. Next, create a production-ready Kanban board with the Mern stack, including Google single sign-on and drag and drop. Learn more at fullstackbasics.io/projects.
So in here, there isn't much to change, because all that we did was make our vanilla JavaScript mimic a little more what we're doing in React. All we have to do here really is just change how we are handling the state for the transactions. And what we're going to do is first, we're going to change this to include a variable called stored, which gets the transactions from the local storage. Pause and implement. And then we are going to either return the stored transactions or simply we're going to return an empty list. So you may be asking yourselves, what is the difference? So to see the difference clearly, I included the commented out version that we included in episode 6. And here we have the version that we just changed in this episode. So let's go and see what really changed. Well, first, we are checking local storage for transactions. And then only if we find them, then that's when we parse them. And if we don't find anything, we simply default to an empty array. Now, the main justification for this is that this new version makes debugging easier if something breaks, because you could console log stored. And also, the introduction of the ternary operator in this line forces us to think, do I have data? If I do, that's when I parse it. And if not, I fall back to empty. Ternary gives you tighter control over what counts as valid stored data. This allows us to actually improve our React version a little more. Awesome. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll see you in DevTruths number 8.